Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
I have a story in my book about I'd applied to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The accountant at our church offered to take me on as a pro bono client, and he did the application, which is quite a bit of work. And he specializes in doing this. He is a nonprofit accountant. And he told me that I was the very first client in his 30 years of practice who was rejected by the IRS. That's my biggest story of failure. And at the time, I thought that was the end of my dream. That was about 3 years in. And really, it was the beginning.
I'm Julie Lyles-Carr. You're listening to the Almondas podcast. Hey, I know that we are rolling into the new year faster than we probably would expect, but we're there. And I have the perfect guest on today to talk to us about how to really think about how we want to do things, not just if you're finding this in January, at any time of the year, a way of looking at your purpose, a way of looking at how you contribute to this world. And I'm so excited for you to get to know her. Stephanie Newton, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You have been quite the writer and content creator on a variety of fronts, but take my listener back to who you are, where you live in the world, all that good stuff.
Okay, I've been married for 32 years. I have 2 sons who are grown, 28 and 30. We've lived in the Atlanta area for 25 years. So about 23 years ago, I had a 4 and a 6-year-old, I think they were at the time. And we had just moved to the community. And I noticed that there was a speaker at a local church. And it was advertised, and what grabbed my attention was that she was an author who I just read a couple of her books, and I couldn't believe that she was speaking in person. So I didn't know anyone at this big church, bought my $10 ticket, sat in the front row. Her name is Becky Tirabassi. She's actually still a very active pastor. And at the time, her book was Let Prayer Change Your Life. So I sat in the front row just wanting to hear her. And what I'll never forget a couple of things. One is she was just overflowing with passion for her project. She was on fire with enthusiasm. And I looked at that and thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to be on fire with enthusiasm for something? And then now I will say that I had these 2 little kids. I had quit my corporate career to be home with them. That was not in our plan. But I think a lot of listeners can relate to the feeling when you have a baby and all of a sudden plans change. So
Right.
I was doing what I felt called to do. I was home with my kids. I was thoroughly enjoying it, other than the sleep deprivation. And when the speaker ended, Becky's main point was, if there is something you love to do, pray about how it could help other people. Pray about how you could find a way to use it to help other people. And if you do that, you will have landed on God's exciting plan for your life. And I'll tell you, that just stuck with me. I left, and she, of course, was encouraging daily prayer time. I had certainly done that before. I decided to be more committed to that. I sat down every morning, had my quiet time, and I prayed. Lord, help me use this thing I love to do, which was using grocery coupons. If you can believe, that's the best thing I could come up with. But it was just between me and God. So I could be honest, this is what I really love to do. How can I use this to help other people? And by day 11 of praying about it, I'm sitting in church with my husband. In the church bulletin, they had an appeal for the local food pantry that was apparently in desperate need of food, and all of the items listed were coupon items. I went to the grocery store the next day with my coupons, just, as a game, and got $60 of groceries for $10. And any coupon user knows that's exciting, that's fun. I found the food pantry. I didn't even know there was a hunger issue in my community. I certainly didn't know there was a food pantry, but I delivered the food personally. I encourage people to do this so that an issue can become real to you.
Right, to see it.
Had I just given it at a collection bin, I don't think I would have become emotionally connected, which is the key to our becoming passionate about a purpose. We have to become emotionally connected somehow, or perhaps we're already emotionally connected to something, and we can use what we love to do to help that cause. So I sat in the waiting room because I wanted to meet with the director to tell her my brilliant idea for using coupons to donate food to charity so that she could communicate this to the charity's supporters. Because I was a mom with 2 little kids, there was no way I could do anything with this great idea, but somebody else could. Well, she didn't have time to see me.
Right.
She's seeing clients all day. But that was the best thing. God had me right where he wanted me. I sat there for half an hour waiting for her amongst other women like me with kids like mine.
Right.
And what struck me was that we were just the same. We were just in different circumstances. She loved her kids so much that she was willing to sit in that waiting room for a couple of bags of groceries before she went home after her day of work. And I looked at that and I thought, oh my gosh, I have the privilege of not having to go to work. I love to use grocery coupons. I'm going to start buying food for charity. And really that is where I found my lane.
Right. And you launched that into a really amazingly successful initiative called Coupon Mom. And you had all kinds of amazing things that were going down with that. When did you begin to realize, okay, God met me. I found a passion. I was able to connect to it and see it and really understand what's going on. And now this thing is proliferating into something that I never imagined. I mean, when was that moment that it kind of hit you like, whoa, what just happened here?
I'll tell you and I'm not sure that it's a moment. This is over 20 years.
Right.
And I think this is what we do. Sometimes we sabotage our dreams by thinking we are not capable of it. So I knew I wasn't capable of this. I had worked in a corporation in marketing. I knew that in order to grow an idea, it took millions of dollars of advertising and marketing, and I certainly didn't have that. I was on a budget. I was home with my kids. So I was missing. That's why my book is called Imagine More, because Ephesians 3:20, God can do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that's within us. So when you talk about the moment, it was actually a process of elimination. I kept trying to give this idea away to big companies. I had a PowerPoint presentation. I had a little bit of audacity. I got on the phone. I got appointments with presidents and vice presidents for the grocery store chains and the coupon companies. And I had a very compelling presentation on why this would benefit their companies, that they could get more people using coupons and going to their stores. And they all agreed. They liked the concept, but it wasn't their business plan. Mm-hmm. So they kept saying, back to you, but how can we help you? And so ultimately what happened was I got enough help from the coupon companies, the grocery store chains, the charities, the civic organizations, and a local university, Georgia Tech. They developed a whole database for me. People pitched in and helped. And eventually, the moment was when I realized, oh my gosh, this thing is running. And over time, we ended up having millions of members. I guess I don't have to give it away. And you know what's better? God, thank you so much for closing all of those doors to me, because I would have missed out on how wonderful it is to be in the middle of this really miracle.
Right, right. Absolutely incredible to see how it's grown and what it proliferated to. And, you know, Stephanie, you're so right that so often we can have something that we feel like God is asking us to just take the first step. And we can get so focused on thinking, well, this is who I am today. This is what I have capacity for today, that we can miss what might be possible or what does grow with time because it's not happening all in the moment. On the flip side, I think some of us can get really torn up in the idea of, I have this big vision for doing this huge thing, and if it doesn't happen within the next 3 months, then it must not have been from God. If it doesn't just go into this national presence or this movement or this many followers or whatever the thing is by which we're measuring if maybe this thing has validity. How do we get in the gear that matches the season of life God has us in with his pacing and not calling it a failure before it's even had an opportunity to flourish? How do we do that?
Well, that's such a good question, because it's always easy to understand the answers to these questions when you're looking in retrospect.
In retrospect.
So in retrospect, I can tell you that my pastor gave me a great a great phrase, which was, you can't take the elevator to success, you have to take the stairs. That's not original, but the concept is that we're taking the stairs. It's slower, but it builds muscles. And by the way, we get to know a lot of people along the way. It's the experience, the journey, which was the best part for me. Mm-hmm. If I had gone from 0 to 100, I would have missed out on so much. And here's the other interesting thing, is that I always say I didn't experience what the world would call unbelievable success for about 5 years. But every little thing was a success to me because I didn't know what was at the end of 5 years.
Right.
So when I got the email from the little girl who, in 3rd grade, with her mother, they had gone and they had bought groceries for charity, that one little thing, that was success. I got an email from a woman in the very beginning, I might have had 100 users of my website. And I got an email from a woman that was enough to reach other parts of the city. The newspaper had done a feature on my website, so now people in other suburbs are using it. And this woman emailed and said, I am saving so much money with your website. My husband said, if I keep saving this much money, he's going to take me to Red Lobster for dinner. Now, I loved that email because it was making her happy, it was making her husband happy. And was I making any money? No. By the way, making money was never even on the radar screen because when I started my website in the year 2001, there were no advertisers
right.
for a website my size. So thankfully, that wasn't on the table because it's very difficult, I think, in today's age to start an initiative without numbers as our metric.
Right.
But here's what I say, Julie. I say, if I had quit before the 5 years, and how many companies or initiatives or projects quit before 5 years because it's not making numbers? Most of them. But if I had quit before that 5-year mark, that would be like standing in line at the lottery ticket redemption place. I've never bought a lottery ticket, so I don't really know how it goes. But standing in line, and you have the winning lottery ticket, but you leave because the line's too long and you throw your ticket away.
Right.
I mean, and by the way, while you're standing in line, you might get to know some really nice people. And I want to emphasize that because there are so many wonderful benefits that aren't quantifiable by the world's numbers. But God's kingdom doesn't work like ours. His economy is different.
Absolutely.
So let's not, I've recently heard a speaker, Bob Goff, who said, we don't always have to get the home run. We could be the person carrying someone else around the bases.
I love that because we forget that sometimes that can be so incredibly powerful. And Stephanie, I've often laughed because when I started blogging 1 million years ago, I, at times, have kicked myself in the past going, I didn't understand the business opportunity that was there. I was using it as an online journal, which a lot of women were. I was developing community. I had just had twins. We moved to a new city 5 weeks before they were born. I didn't know anybody. So it was this outlet for my writing. But I didn't feel the need to try to monetize that because it just didn't exist really at the time. There were people who were starting to figure that out. But what I was putting out there was truly, the motive was pure, not because my heart's always pure, but because it just the platform at that time, it wasn't about trying to strategize, look at numbers, try to monetize, try to get advertisers. It wasn't that. And ultimately, that foray into blogging has led to me being able to do a lot of other cool things. But I think sometimes we are missing, particularly in today's culture, as you referenced, when we think about online spaces and all of these things. There are words in our vernacular now that are so much more common than I think that they used to be. Those of us who've been in marketing or in media for a while might have used them a lot more. But you hear everybody now, somebody who loves to bake and has some great recipes is trying to figure out how to monetize their social platforms. They're trying to figure out how to monetize and show engagement and all these words. So, in your case, what's so beautiful is it was not starting from a place where you felt this pressure that it had to become vocational. And I noticed this a lot during the arc of my time in vocational ministry, is people feeling like that if there was not a dollar amount assigned to something that was a passion, then it somehow invalidated it. It somehow made it a hobby and not necessarily something God was calling them to do, even though we see in Scripture someone like Paul, who had this huge call on his life, who during the day was making tents, and yet somehow we invalidate that. How do we both disentangle ourselves from looking at some of the things that maybe God would call us to do through the lens of being able to make money? Or how do we disconnect that? Or is it also possible that sometimes God can give you something that you're supposed to do that will become your vocation? But how do we get a healthy place where we understand those things? Because I think a lot of us get really stuck there.
Well, I agree with you. And let me clarify. I am all for making money. I am a entrepreneur, free enterprise, capitalism. If you have a great idea, I love stories of, young kids creating an app in Silicon Valley and they've made crazy money because they're providing something valuable to people, something that matters. So on the one hand, that is, we want to know that what we're providing is valuable and it matters. And so no shame in making money. There's all kinds of really wonderful things to do with money. Our initiative would never reach millions of people if it hadn't started making money on its own. I have a story in my book about I'd applied to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The accountant at our church offered to take me on as a pro bono client, and he did the application, which is quite a bit of work. And he specializes in doing this. He is a nonprofit accountant. And he told me that I was the very first client in his 30 years of practice who was rejected by the IRS. That's my biggest story of failure. And at the time, I thought that was the end of my dream. That was about 3 years in. And really, it was the beginning. Because the flip side of that was when my website did start making money, because an advertiser was invented. And once the advertiser was invented, then I just put that on the website and I forgot about it. I didn't have to worry about selling advertising. But because so many people used the website, so many people found it of value, that it made a lot of money. And our accountant said the best thing that ever happened to me was being rejected by the IRS.
Interesting, yeah.
And I looked at it as I'm like, thank you, God, that we actually paid a lot of taxes instead of taking money from the government while providing a service that helped people. I call it social entrepreneurship.
I love that phrase.
And today, I'm giving grants to people. I mean, it's so wonderful. Like, you don't have to be a 501c3, and then you can support your family, and then ultimately you can give grants. I never saw that coming. So that's the piece about it's okay to make money. I just had to say that. But then the other piece is, well, how do we measure our value if it's not making money? And I go back to, oh gosh, am I loving other people the way God wants me to? Mm-hmm. And if what I'm doing helps one person or two people, it's easy with a website or a blog. You look at reports and you see the number of visitors, and it's easy to forget that one visit could be a whole family. And you don't know the impact your little thing is having on someone's. If you're a writer and you're writing inspirational stuff, are you helping bring people closer to God? How do you put a value on that? Are you inspiring people to follow their own dream that might end up being this incredible thing that reaches millions of people? How do you put a value on that? I think on this side of heaven, we're not going to know the full impact of our putting our gifts out there. And maybe we don't need to. And
Right.
maybe that's where trust comes in. But I think the worst thing we can do is if you truly believe that what you're doing helps other people, the worst thing we can do is let the world tell us it's a failure.
Right, absolutely. And, it was interesting. I started a nonprofit that did get 501c3 status. It was, and my daughter and I were awarded some finances to be able to start something that we entitled To Dance to Dream, which was dance and performance opportunities for individuals who are differently abled. And she did a magnificent job directing that initiative. We rolled for several years, almost 10 years. And then during COVID, because of the nature of the population we were serving and the medical necessity of them being very careful and not being exposed in those kinds of situations, and then that interrupting our fundraising cycle for 2 years, we ended up having to shutter the 501c3 as it had existed. And it's interesting because I think there is a lane where that could be seen as a failure. But what we ultimately found was that the community that had developed was so strong that today that group, that core group, is continuing. My daughter drives up from San Antonio now to do some different things. We'd had this moment, this inflection point where it had gone national. We were doing some national things with it. And then through the process of the pandemic, all of that had to contract necessarily because of serving well the population we had been called to. How do we allow room and accommodation for both seeing that God can do more than we could ever imagine, and yet at the same time not get so invested and hang on so tightly that when He might want to change lanes, when He might want to show us, you did the thing, it's great, and now that season's going to wrap. How do we hold loosely, both with great responsibility and reverence for what we've been called to do, but also sometimes we can get a death grip on something that we fall in love with, and it can make it hard for us to follow when God's going to change course, change the pace, whatever He's going to do. How do we live there?
Well, and I think that you nailed it, because it's about, are we clinging too tightly to our plan, or can we look a little further and look at God's purpose? So, as you know, I think again in retrospect, it's easy to see how beautiful that you planted seeds that grew on its own, and perhaps that's what we have to say to ourselves: is God is using us to plant seeds, and if we hold too tightly to this one initiative that can really flourish on its own now, then we're going to miss His next step for us. Right. So I have a friend who gave me this metaphor of walking on the path. If she did physical therapy, if you look at your feet, your specific steps, and cling too tightly to that, actually you stumble and fall. If you look ahead to the spot where you're walking without looking at your feet, you won't fall. And that, her analogy was, that's God. Are we looking at God? What is the next thing? And can we recognize that it's time to move on? And to the same point, can we recognize when we have to be careful, because you know how you can get pulled off your path?
Right.
You can get pulled into a different lane, and people might be telling you that's the thing to do. That happened to me several times on my path, and I would say, you know what, that's a good thing. That's a good thing that I'm being offered, or a good opportunity, but that is going to detract me from this purpose I have. What is your purpose? Okay, stick with the purpose, and perhaps that's how we can weigh our decisions.
Right.
Stay focused on our purpose. And you went on to do some other cool stuff.
Right. I mean, and that's the reality, is that God continues to use us even beyond some of the things that we might say, oh, that was an apex moment. He still has the capacity to make really cool things happen that we hadn't seen coming. And I love that you've got, the title of your book is Imagine More, which I think is such a great title. Do what you love, discover your potential. Talk to me about the woman who's saying, okay, well, now I feel guilty because right now I'm content doing what I'm doing, and maybe my life seems a little simple by some measure, or maybe I'm not imagining more. I'm just imagining keeping the house picked up and the kids in clean clothes and making sure that the school run happens. Do we always need to be imagining more? Do we need to be in a place where we're sort of conjuring discontent on occasion in order to try to find purpose? Because sometimes I think that we can miss what we're right in the midst of because we can feel pressure sometimes socially to, well, shouldn't you be doing more. So how do we allow imagining more to be this beautiful place of collaboration with God instead of imagining more to become a conduit for discontent? What's the secret there?
Well, I think that's what everyone struggles with, because it's so easy to listen to the world and say, more must be a big project. More must be a big committee. More must be, when really, what is our purpose? Our purpose is to love God and love other people. And so that's going to look different depending on where we are in our life. So back to, at least in my circumstance, when I had this idea of teaching people how to save money on groceries, my idea was, wow, I could teach people how to save like hundreds of dollars a month. I could do that. They don't understand how to do it. I can teach them how to do it, and then maybe they'll donate some food to charity because it's a free service. Now how could I do that? I could travel around the country and teach free workshops. I could, travel. When you think about that, I've got a 4 and a 6-year-old, and I've made a decision to be home with them. That didn't fit in my life. So what fit in my life? Well, like, what fits in your current life, because you don't want to give up this beautiful life that God gave you. And you want this. What fit for me was a website from my home. And what fit for me was, how did I promote my website? I got involved with the kids' school. I got involved in teaching children how to use grocery coupons. I took kids on field trips. I looked in my own sphere of influence in my own life alongside my children, and I did what I could do in that environment. I didn't say, I have to go on. It wasn't until many years later that I started going on national TV. And even national TV, I was just out of town for one night. My husband was here. So I do think it's possible to do something with the thing that you love to do. And let's even back up another step. The thing that Becky Tirabassi really talked about was how we could love our kids better and how we could love ourselves by giving ourselves grace and not to expect that we have to be a perfect mother, whatever that is. What is a perfect mother?
What is that? Anyway,
What is a perfect mother? All I know is that I love my kids as much as I possibly can, and I don't know how I could love them any better. Am I always patient? No. Am I always, organized? No. So within our current life, if we just focus on our purpose is to love God and love others, it simply might be being better at what you have decided to do. Right. It doesn't have to be anything to the outside world. It doesn't have to look like anything. It doesn't have to have numbers. You don't have to get plaques and awards. Between you and God, if you're following His purpose for you.
Right. I love that you bring in this idea of being very intentional in your local community to serve there, because now that we have all of these platforms that can reach anywhere, so often I think the things we fall in love with or we become passionate about, we begin putting it on blast out there to the world, which is great. I mean, we need that level of awareness of things that are going on, ways that we can help. But are we actually making a difference in our local community? And to your point, Stephanie, I think we've been in a season which I do think that we need to be serving each other in the local church. I think that's really important. And I think that's taking care of family, our church family. But sometimes I have seen, because of the nature of a lot of our churches today, which can be very complex with lots of programs and requiring lots of volunteering and on, we can miss the opportunity to really invest in our community, on our street, with our neighbors, in the local school, with the little local soccer club, or whatever the thing is. I love that a big part of your story was that you were looking for places to serve that weren't just within the comfort and safety of maybe your church volunteering responsibilities. You were looking outside of that, and how often I think we can miss opportunities in that way. I'm sure we've probably got a listener who's going, oh, there's this thing that I feel like maybe I should put out there, but it's so scary to release an idea into the ether and see what's going to happen. What if I say this thing and people are like, that's really kind of dumb? Or what if I think I've had this moment of connection with God and I try something and it doesn't work out? How do we get past so that we can imagine more? How do we get past that sense that a lot of us have of not wanting to fail, and surely not wanting to fail publicly?
Okay, I think that's good. That's a great question, because here's what I would say. Accept the fact that people are going to think your idea is stupid, and they will tell you that. Yeah. Accept the fact that you are going to fail over and over and over again. And if you accept that, that is not a reflection on who you are. That is not a reflection on your value or your worth. It has as much to do with the person not understanding. It has as much to do with God saying, you know what? I've got a different door for you. Now, I love to tell the story. I've told it a million times. Coupon Mom was not my idea. I was the woman saving money with grocery coupons. I got a lucky break. I got on local TV that led to national TV. And I went on, I demonstrated this, and I was Good Morning America, and they loved it. And they called me that day, and they said, we'd like to have you on again. And they ended up having me on a couple more times, and they said, we'd like to hire you, and we're going to give you the name, the Coupon Mom. And so that really started it. Julie, I always stop with that story. Okay, let me tell you the rest of the story. 2.5 years later, I was fired by Good Morning America. Fired, okay. Why? Because I had a terrible segment. It was a disaster. I write about it in my book. It was just awful. It was so embarrassing and so cringy. It happened 17 years ago. I simply kind of fell apart. I kind of lost my train of thought. The ideas I had weren't that great. I was kind of faking my way through a subject I didn't really know well. Don't get out of your lane. Don't get out of your lane.
Don't get out of your lane.
And I've never told anyone that story. I told my husband and my mother. For 17 years, I let that silly little story have a grip on me. And last week, on a podcast, the interviewer asked me why I stopped going on Good Morning America. And I told the story. As soon as I told the story, it was like popping a balloon. Mm-hmm. They had no oxygen anymore. It had no power over me, and it was funny. And I sat down and I wrote a full chapter about this funny failure. Do you know what that failure led to? That led to going on 38 other national TV shows, because I couldn't go on any other shows because I was on Good Morning America.
You're under contract to them, yeah.
That led going on the Oprah Winfrey Show. That led to developing the best friendship I've ever had with the publicist who I hired to help me, because I had been fired from Good Morning America and I needed some help. That led to so many beautiful things. That horrible, awful failure. Was that a failure, or was that one of God's stepping stones in my journey?
Right.
And now, you know what? I decided I'm telling everyone how I got fired from Good Morning America. Because
I love that.
You can fail, and I failed in front of 6 million people.
Yeah.
You know? That's kind of good. That's efficient.
Yeah, it's efficient. Yeah. Just knock it out all at once. Yeah.
Don't be afraid of failure.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that you're sharing that, because so often we do hear really the Cinderella story. We think that's how it's always supposed to go. And even when you arrive, you know, one of the things that I've talked about before is when you watch a documentary on Everest, it's not the deadliest part of getting to Everest is not getting to the peak. It's getting down. That's where a lot of people end up having all kinds of issues. And we often don't realize, we're so focused on the ascent. We don't think what it's going to be like to make sure we get down safely to whatever the next climb is that we're supposed to have. So your willingness to share that is just absolutely exceptional. I love it. Well, Stephanie, tell the listener where they can find the book, find you online, all the exciting things you're doing. It's such great inspiration and encouragement. So let us know where we can find you.
So you can find me at stephanienelson.com. The book is selling on Amazon. It's called Imagine More. And I also want to throw in that I got an advance for this book. I didn't need it. I'm retired. So I'm using the money from the advance to give grants to people who have ideas. So small grants, my tagline is we give small grants to people with big dreams. So there might be someone with a couple little kids who has an idea, but maybe you don't have the $1,000 you need to get it kicked off. I do. So on stephanienelson.com, I have an application for our Imagine More grants. We have a Facebook group, and we'll be doing things like, I just came up with this yesterday, but my husband says it's a good idea, so I'm talking about it. We're going to go to schools and do Imagine More challenges, where like the service group at the school could compete with another school, and they could come up with really cool events that would help the community. And then we'll give the club the cash prize.
Oh,
and so
fun.
I'm going to start peddling that idea tomorrow. But I just I'm in the point of my life where I want to carry people around the bases. I don't need a home run. I want to help people support their dreams. So if anyone, StephanieNelson.com, you can send me an email. I'd love to talk to you. Really encourage you and understand what your dream is.
That's amazing. Stephanie, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us today. Be sure and check out all the good stuff that Stephanie was talking about. Rebecca will put that in the show notes, so be sure and go there, and you'll find links to all these great things that she's been talking about. And I love to connect with you too. Go to allmomdoes.com, allmomdoes on the socials, and I'm Julie Lyles-Carr, all the places. Stephanie, again, you've just been a breath of fresh air, a lot of momentum and wind in our sails for the new year. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. And I'll see you next time on the All Mom Does podcast.